everybody. Here we are, another midweek boost. I hope you guys are doing well. And if you recall, we're in this month, which is around sexual hormones and specifically around intimacy, which is what we're kind of covering over the next few weeks. Last week, we talked about differentiation. And if you missed that, I really encourage you to listen to that video. It really is an important concept when we think about intimacy. And so we're going to kind of build on that, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we call the crucible of intimacy, which is another section in David Schnarch's book called The Passion of Marriage. And again, we recommend this book. It's a great book. It's, again, not a sex manual, but it is about intimacy and how important it is for us to try and build that intimacy.
So we're going to talk about the crucible of intimacy, and I'm going to read a paragraph here from the book that I think is a good summary. This author's approach he calls the sexual crucible approach. The name describes how it often feels when marriage's classroom is in session. What's an example of a crucible in marriage? How about the fact that your spouse can always force you to choose between keeping your integrity and staying married, between holding on to yourself and holding on to your partner? These integrity issues often surface around sex and intimacy, about what the two of you will and won't do together. They can just as easily arise over issues about money, parenting, in-laws, and lifestyle. So basically anything. The more emotionally enmeshed you and your spouse are, fused together, which we talked about last time, the more you will push this choice right down to the wire. Stay in the marriage or get divorced. The key is not to lose your nerve or get overreactive or locked into an inflexible position. I know that's tough when you think your marriage is about to explode, or you're about to sell out your beliefs, preferences, or dreams, but it's actually part of the people growing process of marriage.
It's interesting. I think when I listen to that, there are a couple of concepts that come to mind, and I think one of the things is how do we avoid conflict within intimacy and marriage, and we do it because we think we're actually doing the right thing. We're actually trying to avoid the discomfort of conflict, and yet that actually is important for us to have the crucible to be able to explore these sort of intense emotions and these conflicts in a way that really allows for openness, honesty, authenticity, and actually builds into that intimate space that we're actually wanting and desiring.
I think that's a big part of why I think this book is absolutely genius. It's because the author basically says all the struggles of your marriage that actually can lead to intimacy.
Right.
And I know for a long time, Simon and I believed like our struggles were taking away from intimacy, and the way we were handling it, it was. But this book actually invites us into a path to say this struggle, which we even talked about last time, of independence or connection, the struggle of my integrity versus connecting to my partner. Like, that's normal in marriage. And that actually can be a gift if we can learn to navigate these things in a cohesive way.
And so one of the concepts here is how do we embrace the difficulties, which actually is a deeper understanding of ourselves and of our partner. So it becomes an important part of how we actually develop intimacy. Now, we don't know where you are in your relationships, but I can tell you, for us, we avoided conflict for a long time. And part of that is because there are a lot of really intense emotions. And Marn is more of a shutdown person, and I'm more of an explosive person. And so it creates such a different dynamic. And we ended up having what we called, and what other authors have called, the double bind. It felt like if we didn't talk about it, we were avoiding the emotion. But if we did talk about it, we would actually feel like we can be ourselves. And so you might feel this tension in relationships sometimes between how much can I express of who I am as an individual, or am I going to kind of give in to whatever the other person's wishes and desires are, which is really where codependency and enmeshment come in. And so again, this crucible of intimacy is difficult because it's actually about addressing and embracing the challenges rather than avoiding them. And that can be very, very, very difficult.
I'm going to read another little section from the book, and it's interesting because he talks about integrity around facing reality. And pretty much that's what we've been talking about. Are we going to turn and face the reality of the conflict or this normal tension in a marriage of independence versus connection? And I just hadn't ever really put it together that it's a form of integrity and it's a form of integration.
Right.
So this is what he has to say about that. Facing relationship realities produces the personal integrity necessary. That's a key word, necessary for intimacy, eroticism, and a lifetime loving marriage. So facing these realities to increase our personal integrity is necessary for intimacy. How is integrity relevant to marriage? Integrity is the ability to face the realities, to face realities. It's living according to your own values and beliefs in the face of opposition, which opposition is normally going to be there because we're two separate people. And it is also the ability to change your values, beliefs, and behaviors when your well-considered judgment or concern for others dictates it. So here we're talking about some flexibility. Putting your partner's goals on par with your own and delaying your own agenda accordingly takes and makes for integrity.
So that might sound a little kind of complicated, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Really what we're saying is, first of all, understand your own integrity, which is really how your values play out in your world. But also it's saying, can I put that on the back burner a little bit so I can actually hear what the other person's belief system is, what their values are, what is important to them. And now can we have a different kind of conversation rather than I've got to believe me and you have to believe what I believe. Or vice versa. And so a lot of times we avoid the conflict because we feel like either I have to capitulate to the other person or I have to dig my heels and prove that I'm in the quote right.
And I like how he says like on par with.
Yeah.
We're not saying that one person's values or goals has to be less than.
Right.
We're not saying that we have to give that up because that wouldn't be integrity. But on par with makes me think of, can we hold enough space in our relationship where all of those things can be?
So, and the other question that comes up as you hear that is, what does that got to do with sex? Well, if we think that's the sexual intimate interactions we have are some of the most vulnerable places that we go to as human beings. It's where we're the most open. It's where we're the most literally naked with ourselves and with this other person. And that creates that vulnerability, which then says, how am I going to be in a comfortable, loving, emotionally connected place without losing myself or feeling like I have to not be me in the interaction.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes growing up, it's really difficult to hold on to ourselves or to say, I do have space to be me, especially if we don't feel that way in our family. But also the school system really invites a lot of conformity and pressure to conform. So we're in a sense enculturated to not necessarily hold on to our integrity. And then all of that collides when you're in an intimate relationship. And once again, here's the invitation to say we can use this for positive and on the path that we would want.
And an example for us has been when we first were married or first dating even, we felt like in order for us to have a quote healthy relationship, we had to think alike, we had to be alike, we had to do things together all the time. And it took us some time to actually pull and tease that apart and saying, but if we're going to be two individuals who are equal, we are going to have different ideas. And in fact, over the course of that time, as we teased that out, we're actually incredibly different, which actually isn't a surprise. We're actually very, very different from each other. And so how do we then develop intimacy in that is by saying, it's okay. In fact, we embrace the differences, and now it's okay that we have different thoughts and desires, and different, even within the context of sexual intimacy, we have different wants and desires, and that's okay. I don't have to feel uncomfortable with it unless it violates my own value system, and then I can say that and be honest and transparent about it, and Martin can do, and so we can have that kind of conversation. And it's kind of like, when there are times when one person in the intimate relationship says they're not really interested in sex, that can be okay, rather than having to feel like I've got to convince somebody to be okay having sex. We can just say, I'm just not interested right now. And if it's Martin who's in that place, I can ask the question. So is there something more you'd like to share about that? So it doesn't have to be a place of conflict. It can actually be a space of discovery about this person that I love and care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if we can go to a place of discovery, that means we're inviting in some curiosity. We're creating some relational safety in the midst of that. I mean, I think those things can really, really be helpful, because really the crucible of intimacy is talking about facing the difficult things, facing our fears, facing our own insecurities, and actually embracing. One of the things that's in the book is embracing the heat. It's like encouraging. He's inviting us to embrace the emotional intensity and challenges within our relationship, because that's the path to greater intimacy. But man, that is really difficult sometimes.
And some of you may not even feel relationally safe to do that. And that's okay. That might just be an indicator that you might need some additional support so that you can actually be in that place together. I think one of the other things that comes up for me is as we are talking about this is, how am I actually being open to the fact that this is difficult? We don't have to be we can be in that same place and still say it's difficult, and still be loving, and still be intimate. I think, some of you might be saying, and we used to say this a lot, and I think some of you will relate to this, is, man, why do we always have the same conversations over and over again? It's like, can I hit the tape recorder? Can I just record it and then we can just play it next time, because it's the same thing over and over again? And that's kind of that gridlock that you get in. It's where both individuals have kind of stuck to their agenda rather than being open to a real conversation. So if you're noticing that is probably one of the indicators to think about. It's like, how am I embracing the difference between us, rather than how am I digging myself in to try and prove that I'm right?
Mm-hmm. And actually, if you have one of those conversations that you could like literally just play back, if you recorded it like over and over and over, we facilitate and mediate difficult conversations. And in the midst of that, we teach you tools so that you can actually move that conversation forward instead of having to go around that same mountain over and over again. So if that's you, feel free to reach out to us and schedule a conversation. That's not therapy. It's not really even coaching. We're going to have the conversation, and there's going to be safety and tools that you can then take that home and continue those productive conversations.
I think when we think about this, I mean, the communication piece is really a big tool to kind of hone in on. And when we think about that, it's things like, am I talking about myself and what I'm feeling, what my experience is, or am I blaming, or am I pointing the finger at the other person on what they, quote, should do or what they could do, rather than, here's my experience in this situation? And that takes an active listening stance. So if we're actively listening, it means that when Martin is saying something to me, I'm focused on it, I'm paying attention to it, it has meaning to me, it has impact on me, and I'm able to reflect back in a way that says, that's valuable. I see you, I hear you, and you matter to me.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, this sounds super simple. It is. It's not necessarily easy, but it is significant, is super impactful.
Yeah.
The other thing, speaking of communication, is how am I communicating to myself? And a big part of what the author invites us into in terms of these crucible times, the intensity and the conflict, is self-soothing. And I know in our past, we would often pull on the other person to soothe us or to kind of fix the way we were feeling. And once again, the author just flips that around and says, part of holding onto ourselves is to be able to invite that kindness and soothing and reassurance. I can do that for myself. You can do that for yourself. And as we both learn to care for our own hearts, then we're going to be stronger when we come back and have that conversation, to not just melt or not explode. We're going to say, okay, I've gotten some care for myself, and now I can come back with a clear mind, without having to pull or push on that other person.
And part of that is, if you're a conflict avoider, or if you're an explosive person, all of that emotion is actually preventing you neurochemically from actually being in your thinking mind, in the thinking place in your brain. And so when we are not in that, we're going to say things we regret, we're going to explode, we're going to be very reactive. And the point of us self-soothing is not only for ourselves, but it's also so that we come back into the conversation in a thinking place rather than being emotionally reactive. And for me, I'm the emotionally reactive one for between us, and Lauren is more of the shutdown person. And so you can imagine, if I'm being explosive and Lauren is shutting down, that just pushes us further and further apart. And it's really a difficult place then to bridge, unless we can soothe ourselves and say, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm noticing this. And guys, for you out there, if you're listening to this, here's something that I would really encourage, because we as guys are not very good at naming and understanding our own emotion for the most part. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. One of the things you can try and do is start doing a 5 to 10 minute exercise in the morning or in the evening, where you do an emotion journal, where you just say, what was I feeling? How did that feel in my body? And what was the name of that emotion? That over time, you'll start to increase your vocabulary around what that emotion is.
And you can even Google a list of feelings. If you want to expand your repertoire besides, sad, angry, and okay, or something like that. I mean, we used to have 3.
Good, bad, and okay.
Yeah. That we can, you can just look that up and start experimenting with the different feeling words.
That's right.
A couple other practical tips as you lean into the discomfort is going into a conversation. It's really important to be like, hey, I want to talk about this. Is now a good time?
Yep.
And that's where each person has a chance to do a check-in, to be like, ooh, I'm actually pretty tired, or I'm really hungry right now. Right now might not be a good time, but let's schedule it for 5 o'clock, and I'm going to be mentally prepared. You're going to be mentally prepared. So asking for a time that's going to work for both of you, and then limiting the time. If you know that that discussion is really difficult, set the timer for 5 minutes or set the timer for 10 minutes. And no matter where you're at in the conversation, just agree, we're going to take a 5-minute breather, or we're going to pick this up tomorrow. So setting a time, that's great. Also using we language. We want to talk about first about I feel instead of blaming, but the we can be, where's the collaboration? So for example, one of the ways we can start the collaborative part of our conversation is, one way we could address this together is. So that is a way, like if I had a frustration or a concern, it's important for me to be the one to say, hey, this is what I'm concerned about. And one way we could address this together is So I'm offering, in a sense, a solution. Doesn't mean that's where we have to land or stop, but it opens up some exploration on saying, hey, we're on the same team, we're working together, and we want to co-create a win-win solution.
And one of the things I might even add to that is, here's something that we could potentially do. How do you feel about that? Or what do you think about that? So that you can invite in that responsiveness to that. One of the things I would encourage you to avoid is asking why questions. Why questions tend to put people on the defensive. So really consider what and how questions as you start using this language can really be helpful to start bridging some of that conflict place that you're already in. And sometimes we do have to agree to disagree. We don't have to always agree on everything. Now, we used to think we did. We used to believe that. And, there may be some very rare things that you might need to think about and work through to come to some agreement. But I can tell you most of the time it's okay to agree to disagree. But it's important to acknowledge that we have differences and we are different people, and that's okay. It's normal. And we want you to really enjoy the intimacy as part of understanding your own sexual health and sexual intimacy within the context of your intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm. So if you're reading this book alongside of us, feel free to message us privately if you want to stay, if you want us to address something, but we can keep it anonymous, that's totally fine. Or throw out a question or a curiosity into the community. That's great too. There's lots of great stuff in here. We're talking about the highlights and the general outline, but I love it that this author makes things really practical and gives a lot of practical examples.
So we've talked about differentiation. We talked about the crucible of intimacy. Next time, we're going to talk about sexual desire and intimacy and how we start connecting that emotional intimacy into sexual desire and how those connections work as well. So I hope you look forward to joining us next time. And we look forward to hearing from you. Again, if you'd like to do it anonymously, or if you'd like to through a direct message, or if you are interested in just a general question, I guarantee you any question you have, somebody else has that question as well. So don't be afraid to post that if you feel comfortable. But we look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.